Greetings. I am E. Adam Thomas, and here's your damn rant show for September 2017, folks. As you can tell already by the lack of annoying opening title sequence and funny-looking graphics, this is not going to be a funny one. Bear with me, please, folks. I just need to get all this off my chest. I promise the next one will go back to my lame attempts at being unsuccessfully humorous. On September 11th, 2001, I was working for a call center that took mail orders for prescription refills. I was working the swing shift at the time, and I didn't have to be up until about noon most of the time, so I was in bed still. And I was also in the planning stages of starting an internet radio show modeled loosely on Howard Stern's morning show. So I already had started working with my future castmates on developing bits and stuff. One of my cast members, our news girl Brittany, called me up at about, 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning Phoenix time. I really don't remember specifically. She sounded legitimately urgent, panicky, and she told me to turn on the news. Now, seeing as how this was kind of an odd request, especially since we were both in the goth scene at the time, and even being awake before noon was absolutely abhorrent to both of us at the time, I figured it must be important. My cable box was always set to VH1 at the time, so when I turned on the TV, I was fully expecting to have to change channels. But I didn't have to. I was immediately greeted with the scowling face of one Dan Rather, the then anchorman of the CBS Evening News. The self-same anchorman from whom I first learned of the Challenger disaster in 1986. Suffice it to say that any time this old coot showed up on my TV, it was always bad news. As proof, I submit that I was actually broken up with by a girl once on the phone one night while he was a guest on Letterman. So that impression will always be foremost in my mind, but I digress. Both towers were still standing at this time, but I had missed the planes going in. Don't worry, folks, throughout the day, I was able to catch that in reruns numerous times. Chalk it up to an early example of binge watching, if you will. But it wasn't for fun. I'm not really sure why, other than the fact that I was actually feeling a sensation akin to all of my organs simultaneously failing and being ground into a gelatinous mush. I called in sick to work, certain that within a day or two, we'd be thrust into the melee of a global thermonuclear war anyway. So who gives a rat's ass, right? The words terrorism and names like Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were already being thrown out in all directions like weapons-grade t-shirt cannon going rogue. I literally felt like, for all intents and purposes, my life on this planet was over, or at the very least was going to go through an egregious paradigm shift. I was just sitting there, waiting. By 10 o'clock in the morning, I had already given up on my coffee and started in on the beer. I was secretly thanking whatever powers that be that I did not have any children at the time, because I honestly did not want to watch them die. By this time, the FAA had already suspended all national air traffic. This, of course, meant that anything I saw or heard flying over my home would either be military aircraft or fucking ICBMs. I was in tears throughout the day. I was bawling my fucking eyes out. This is going to sound weird, but I want you to go look up the following songs. Pink Floyd, Two Suns in the Sunset. Supertramp, Brother Where You Bound, the song, not the entire album. Deep Purple, Child in Time. Roger Waters, Amused to Death and Watching TV, and Joy Division, Atmosphere. All of these songs were somehow simultaneously stuck in my head like some sort of soundtrack, with psychologically enhanced throbbing bass and dire, soulful strings punctuating every painful, fatalistic thought that crept into my brain, like a poisonous spider determined to mock your false sense of planetary supremacy. We had just elected a president, George W. Bush, who was the butt of every late-night talk show host's jokes, as being a buffoon and an idiot. Had we only known at that time. Very few people were happy with for the election of W. But the fact is, the wheels at the time were already in motion for this attack. It was in the planning stages for several years, as we've later found out. Now, here we are, 16 years later. The weak idiocy of all our supposed security measures to prevent such an attack have already been shown to be more or less a method to enhance our own inherent racism and paranoia than they are to actually preventing a serious-minded attack on U.S. soil by any foreign power or agency. I don't know how many of you remember how much we all mistrusted W, but I'd much rather trust our future well-being to his goofy hands than the downright sociopathic megalomaniac we now have in office. The guy has less self-control than Beavis and Butthead, and he thinks nothing of goading similarly deranged foreign leaders into an act of horrific aggression. I mean, fuck, even Ronald Reagan was willing to bend the knee to the Soviets rather than provoke an atomic cataclysm. Trump has never even considered the possibility that another power would ever dare launch against us because he's basically a Ferengi. He doesn't think China, Russia, or North Korea would ever launch against us because there's no profit margin in it. I've got news for this annoying orange of a president. They don't look at profit margins. That's why this jerk is unfit to serve as a dog catcher, much less commander-in-chief. He has never lived as a normal human being. He's never had to sweat his electric bill not getting paid because his paycheck is late. He's never had to worry about how he's going to pay for a son or daughter's broken arm while waiting for the x-rays to come back. He's never had to deal with personal violence or crime. Hell, he probably had a team of experts at the ready in the front if the front tire of his big wheel broke when he was a kid. He is not a normal human being. He's a silver spoon baby who has been spoiled his entire life. You want me to accept a president who is going to cause the next 9/11 or worse? A man who, after it has already been proven that Kim Jong Un has the capability of glassing a few dozen of our cities or our allies, is still willing to bait that motherfucker into throwing the first punch? A man who thinks of Mexicans as though they are nothing more than ignorant cockroaches. A man who thinks nothing of grabbing a woman's private parts because he's fucking rich and they're just pieces of skin to him. The next 9/11 is not going to be over oil or religion. The next 9/11 is not going to be restricted to 3,000 or 4,000 lives. The next 9/11 is not going to be 4 planes into 3 buildings. The next 9/11 is going to wipe out the entire population of half a dozen cities if we get off lucky. I don't even care anymore whether 9/11 was an inside job. I don't think it was, but that's not even the point anymore. You really don't care about the fact that your kid spilled a glass of milk on the carpet last week when you're watching your entire house go up in flames due to bad wiring or an angry neighbor's vile vitriol. By 2020, if we're still even alive by that point, the attacks on the World Trade Center, the Pentagon, and whatever target Flight 93 was supposed to hit will seem like meager collateral damage. Donald Trump is not fit to lead this country. He will eventually cause the deaths of possibly tens of millions of Americans and whoever knows how many more millions more worldwide. This little shit is going to tweet us into an extinction event. What's the big answer? The big answer is get this asshole out of office as soon as possible. Mike Pence may be a homophobic jerk, but I don't think he will be just arbitrarily cause his own kids and loved ones to die in a nuclear holocaust. Sorry if that seemed a little over the top, folks, but that is honestly how I feel. Next week, back to some funny. Good night, everyone, and take care of each other.